Ladies and gents, welcome back to another Engineers podcast. Today, I'm really fortunate to be joined by Michael Donat, who I've known for an awfully long time, who's VP of Engineering at a fantastic company over in Netherlands, business that I know fairly well called Road. They're building an all-in-one platform for EV charging, and we're going to be exploring a little bit about the sustainability and fintech nuances of the business, but there is a special onus as well on why event sourcing. And Michael's someone that knows an awful lot about this space. So we're going to be listening to someone who's done this time and time again. Michael, thanks for coming to join us. How are you?
Not too bad. Thank you for having me. How are you?
Yeah, absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. We always start with introduction. So, Michael, do you want to give me an introduction or give the audience an introduction into you, your background? Who's Michael, the technology leader?
I've been doing software development in and around London for the last 20 odd years, I think. Obviously, starting as a junior dev in a small company doing podcasting. Learned a bunch. I think it was back in 2005, maybe. We were doing a lot of interesting things with online recording and sort of editing while in the web. So technology was quite interesting. And I sort of moved my career into that idea of what back then we used to call new media. So there's always been multiple systems involved, mostly web development as well, elements of e-commerce and finance. I think throughout my career, I was always looking for places where tech was interesting. It was sort of maybe connecting different aspects of a little bit of hardware, a little bit of sort of audio processing, and so on and so on. At some point, I ended up working for a small startup called Money Technologies, doing money remittance in a way, and it's been a typical story of a very early stage, joining as one of the first few people, ended up building a team in there where I think I've collected a bunch of ideas over the years when I've been managed by somebody on things to do and not to do, and I think that was my first opportunity to actually be responsible for delivering something from a team, basically from ground up, and verifying a lot of those ideas. And I think a lot of my thinking has been sort of shaped back then. I think working in a small startup, things are happening quickly, bringing people in, sort of making it successful was an interesting story. But and I've been sort of carrying and building on this ever since. And I think from then I moved to a company in the UK called Utility Warehouse, which is a multi-utility provider. FTSE 250 company, very big, and we've been sort of brought in there with couple of guys from the network to carry on a digital transformation in a way. And as it often happens, there is a company working well, public, and the IT system is 35-year old, and obviously, preventing the business going forward. So I think a lot of interesting learning in there. I think my job there as VP engineering was mostly to again deal with the teams, deal with people. But I'm lucky enough to work with a great chief architect who sort of introduced the idea of event sourcing and how we could go about transforming that old application into a new one. So a lot of learning that I still take forward to places that I go and try and execute again.
Yeah. And Michael, you probably won't say this yourself, but honestly, that's where I started to learn a lot more about distributed architectures, event sourcing from not working with the business at the time, but I heard about this technology environment that you, others were creating. And I think it's fair to say a lot of people who will listen to this that are London based who know UW will really know that they had a really solid engineering culture, or that's how I understood it from someone external to the business at the time. So I think credit to you and the team for actually cultivating that.
Yeah, I think this whole sort of idea of like, yes, we want to talk about event sourcing, but it's not only about this. I think the general solution design of the platform really supports the overall engineering culture, right? I think we have always been a strong believer, and that's how the team at DW is built in teams that are as autonomous as possible.
Yeah.
And at the same time, that autonomy requires quite a lot of work that I would just say bottom up, right? My job very often was about not telling people what to do, but equipping everybody with the sort of knowledge required and skill required to make their own choices. And I think as you go into distribution, as you go into the sort of idea of things not necessarily being monolithic and not being very synchronous in a way, that allows people choices. I think, we never had very long conversations early on in the year where we have to, I don't know, sign a big deal with Oracle or want to sign a big deal with, but whoever that might be, Atlas running Mongo, like a database, for example, wasn't a conversation that needed to happen. And I think a lot of the thinking was always about it to sort of not to push those decisions as far down the line as we could and give teams generally a freedom to pick the right tool for the job. And I think, even though very often you see it on every single job spec, it sounds very cliche. It is really key to sort of run your environment in such a way that this is possible. But I think the platform architecture has to follow that. If you want to have, I don't know, 20 odd teams and everything is slightly different, everything is sort of looking after their own infrastructure, they can make choices.
Yeah.
Overall way the platform is put together has to allow this as well.
Yeah. Okay. We are going to touch on some of those cultural approaches to technology choice as well. And I'd love to go into a little bit more of,
Yeah.
how you define that or how you help teams define that, how you help teams be autonomous. That's something that I see myself talk more and more about, but we can park that for a second. Talk to us a little bit about the role of VP of engineering now, a newly rebranded Road from eFlux. Talk to me a little bit about that role and also talk to me about the mission of Road.
Yeah, I think maybe we should start with the mission. That
Yeah,
will go nicely into the role as well. I think e-mobility is an interesting business, and that generally it is what it's called when it comes to electric vehicles and charging and so on and so on. And I think on the outset, as anything really, it looks simple. I've been at Road for just over a year, and actually, the topic is quite deeper than just plugging a car and charging in a way. But sort of in a nutshell, to give everybody a good sort of view into what's going on, I think when 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 charging happens, generally there is a transaction. There is a transaction whereby the person who owns the charging station is effectively selling energy, and the person who's charging the car is buying that energy. Now, the way that the market is put together is that those companies or that own and operate those charging stations, they don't necessarily know who the customers are because customers come in to charge with what is called a charge card. And I think there are quite a bit of differences between especially UK market and the rest of the continental Europe, where here in the UK every time I drive an EV, so I live through that pain. Every time I turn up to charge my car, I likely have to download yet another application of the sort of
yeah,
charge station owner, have to register on my debit card, whatever I can then charge. In Europe, that was sort of sorted differently with the idea of charge cards in a way. So you as a driver, you can obtain a card from a company, and that card, sorry, is effectively like a like a payment card, but there's no financial transactions happening. So you take that card, you can sort of tap it on the charging station, and that allows charging. Now, obviously, from a perspective of those station owners, and there's going to be hundreds and hundreds of them that deploy stations, they still need to know who is the holder of that card in a way, right? Who is the card holder because they don't issue them. And this is resolved by a roaming network, which is very similar to a mobile roaming network, whereby those companies that sort of operate charging stations and the companies that are issuing cards are entering roaming agreements. And those roaming agreements are obviously contractual, but also based on open standard data exchange protocols in a way. Things we call OCPI, for example, which is the strongest one, but there is a bunch of different hubs that data is exchanged through as well. So the idea now being is that if that driver comes into the charging station to charge and generates usage that might cost £100, let's say, or maybe 50, that company obviously that operates that charging cards, they want to receive payment. And I think this is where Road comes in as an integrated solution, as a SaaS platform that can facilitate that sort of financial transaction in a very sort of core of our functionality. So end to end thinking about it, charge station owners that want to sort of generate revenue on making charging available to the wider public, they would sign up for an account with us. They can obviously control a lot of things around their charging stations, things like pricing, things like availability for different networks and whatnot. And obviously, the charge point then is operating through our platform. And equally, we then have all of those roaming agreements with the so-called MSP cards or MSP companies in a way that issue cards, where we then control who is allowed to charge on the charging station. And effectively, at the end of the month, we run billing. If you, for example, run your station through our platform, you get reimbursed from Road. So we sort of take the liability, we reimburse our customers, and then
yeah,
we trace our costs on the MSP side as well. Now, as a business, we have an MSP side as well, so we obviously issue cards ourselves too. But I think we see a lot of changes in the market where we strongly believe that in the future the focus on cards is going to be less as payment terminals come in the standard with charging stations, right? I think again, especially in the UK, we're very used to just basically tapping our phones for payments, and I really strongly believe that's going to be the standard of e-mobility going forward.
Yeah, that's some seriously good insight, and I think even at that last point, that's one reason for driving you towards your mission. What are the other reasons do you feel that the business feel really strongly about driving you towards your mission?
Yeah, I think look, as every business, we have a purpose as well, and we have a marketing department that defines it very nicely. And you know, we want to make that sort of experience effortless, both for drivers and for charge station operators. And I think you know there's just way too many obstacles when it comes to mostly entering the market from you know from a charge point provider perspective. And this is what drives us. We, you know, we want to offer very wide compatibility of when it comes to manufacturers of charging stations. Effectively, you know, whatever you bring in should work on our platform. To the point where, while we were still running the eFlux brand, one of the sort of slogans of the company was "Feel free," and that came from you know, feel free to plug in whatever you want into the
Yeah,
platform. You know, um, and that's sort of been the driver. And I think you know it is a very fast growing market, and there is a lot of sort of you know a lot of that is built around technology, which is you know for me it was exciting. Sort of
yeah,
spent you know many years working for effectively a large energy company in the UK, and the energy industry is an example of something that is very old. And you know we have it's 2023, and most of the industry still exchanges the most important flows, as it's called, through SFTP servers. So going into something that's been defined as a communication protocol in the last few months, where there's a lot of maybe not IoT, but there's a lot of you know clients or hardware somewhere there in the world that communicate with you. It's really exciting. It's sort of a new approach, a lot of new thinking that you know we've gathered in the last sort of 5-10 years when it comes to software engineering can be applied to this. So
yeah,
putting it all together into a platform is basically the driving force in there, right? Like the yes, we're going back to making it effortless in a way and seamless, but that's having a platform that does all of this basically allows that to happen.
yeah. I I would really love to touch on that point that I was asking about initially, and the cultural approaches to technologies, because like you've just touched on, you're you've got experience in the energy space. It is a traditional industry. You've done a phenomenal job in and around London in modern software engineering environments. I'm really keen now to understand how you're marrying the two up and that cultural approach to the technology choices that you've decided to make. It would be great to try and uncover that.
Yeah, complex question this, I think, and just I wanted to start with a little bit of a disclaimer that you know I'm not trying to advocate here. There is one single bullet for everything. But as you said, in those kind of cases where there is an existing software, and very often it's challenging to to continue improving that software to achieve scale or you know reduce time to market, whatever the sort of reasons for that is. I think you know the kind of approach that I tend to pick works particularly well. And going back to this kind of cultural aspect of this, you know, I think we always try to be pragmatic about things, and pragmatic means many different things. But it's in that there's so many different sort of experiences and you know thoughts that I'm kind of merging into this. Whether we go back to really agile way of thinking, whether we go back to really the meaning of DevOps as a methodology rather than a you know a function in a way, and how that all comes together. We sort of touched a little on autonomy. It all comes together. I think if you look at any of the teams that sort of I build, right, it's always there's few things that are always important in a way. Like you want your developers to generally feel empowered, right? They want to be in control of what they do to a degree, obviously doing the right things as well. But people who feel a large dose of ownership in a way tend to care about things more in a way, right? And that has obviously that is visible in many different things in terms of you know how strongly people apply themselves or how proactive they are, how often then they innovate things that they have. So that's always been that sort of that pragmatism, that ownership is the sort of very much building block of everything that we do, and a lot of things come into that. And obviously, again, going back to that autonomy conversation, that sort of ownership comes from this as well, right? Because you really look at the area of the business you're serving, and you think this is your little thing. Nobody kind of tells you what to do other than directionally steering the ship where you want to be, what
Yeah.
are the next objectives. But the execution plan, how we are doing this, again, technology choices, is really within that. And I'm often being asked about how do we keep developers motivated? And again, I think a good story from UW times was that our attrition was very low. People were staying with us for a very long time. So the question was like, how are you guys doing this? That you don't see too many sort of regrettable leavers as we. And I think that was described in a book that I can't find again, but it's sort of, I always say there's three things in my opinion that motivate developers, and I've always been strongly motivated by that myself throughout my career. So the first top of the line is the fact that we do things that matter in a way, things that are being kind of put in production, that we can see usage, that actually make a difference in a way. Nobody wants to be stuck somewhere doing effectively things that never go anywhere, right? Either because they just don't have traction in terms of product traction, or things that are kind of maintenance thing that are just there to keep the lights on. So I think developers hugely motivated by doing things that have an impact. Secondly, being learning new things. And this is also a super important point. I think you will see retention up. You will see happy people in a way if you learn on the job and learn about the domain, learn about technologies. Just generally, if you spend 2, 3, 4 years with a company, you want to go out to the next one having a much stronger profile, right? Being a person that knows more, that is more experienced, that can be applied in many different situations. And if you take those two reasons in a way, they are very much enabled by the fact that you sort of have a large dose of control over what you do. If you have an environment that enables technology choices, doesn't drive top down a lot of those things, it's much easier to experiment, and it's much easier to learn new things, to find new things to do, and more importantly, it's much easier to find solutions for problems in the way that you sort of want, right? So again, you can learn, you can experiment, you can deliver good things, and that sort of changes the way that changes the profile of my job in a way, right? I think maybe a little unfairly, but I think classically a lot of the time VPs of engineering, of head of engineering are sort of in a very supervisory role. Kind of there's a plan, you very strongly execute this, and there is kind of less wiggle room that you would want. And I think what I focus on is to enable this sort of environment that people can experiment and so on. You need to make things smaller in a way, right? The problems that you're dealing with, they need to be smaller. The decisions need to be smaller. So if you do get them wrong, and obviously we don't always get everything right, it's not so costly to sort of back out of it and try something else. And again, that has that strong connection to the sort of approach to microarchitectures, to distributed systems, to generally doing things small and connecting this together. Now, whether you want to call it Unix philosophy, because it's called this as well, but and that's what I meant. I think a lot of this thinking comes together into that little bit of a mashup of those important things. I don't think there is one leading thought into this, but everything comes together. But you want to have a productive teams. You need happy people in those teams, and happy people again are people that do important things. They learn, they need to be paid, but too. That's the third reason I didn't mention. But generally, that's the sort of thing. So I always think about how do we enable that? How do we equip teams more? How to make the right decisions, to kind of empower them in that choice, to give them confidence to make the right choices. That's another thing that you notice quite often, that nobody really, like, if you ask people, hey, do you want to be told strictly what to do? And I think everybody says no, I don't. But then actually kind of reversing this and saying to everybody, hey, I'm going to throw you at the deep end and figure it out, is also a very strong approach. So again, a lot of that is sort of working really sort of at the foundational levels of knowledge and comfort, and just again equipping everybody with the right tools. And there's obviously components to that as well, right? And I think if you ask me how what sort of how I would measure whether this is happening or not, and again there's few different, I don't know, bars on the graph, whatever you want to call them. And there's the first one, which is the obvious, which is just generally craft and mastery of how will developers in the team deliver on technology in a way. And a lot of
Yeah.
that stuff in there is just generally the quality of the code written, test coverage, the appropriate testing techniques as well. And just it's really we're talking about the craft of being a developer. Right? Moving from here, product sort of maturity in a way is super important as well. To have a team that is again autonomous and confident and can execute and deliver on objectives. The team needs to understand their customer. They need to understand their placement within large organizations. They need to understand which sort of business needles they're moving by the work. And I think that's
Yeah.
incredibly important that everybody in the team sort of has a good understanding. I think the times of being a programmer where you sort of get a very strict spec from I don't know
Yeah.
NASA or somebody, you just type that in and job done. That kind of doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So that's two, and we're going into operational as well. So this is where the sort of DevOps mindset comes in very 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 strongly. I think obviously not everybody is going to be a specialist in React as well as some deep networking and CNI and stuff like this. But
Yeah.
generally, we do build teams, and I always build teams from generalists. Of course, everybody has like specialization, but teams are generally very cross-functional, all the way from defining deployments and how the cluster looks like, all the way to kind of moving pixels with CSS. So that operational maturity is important. I think teams build, teams run, teams needs to build sort of processes and different techniques for alerting, for kind of knowing what's going on with the software they're building and being able to react to it as well. So that's three and four. We kind of go into again, this sort of agile maturity. I think I've been an agile evangelist for many, many years. I think I first learned around about agile, and probably back 2007 or 8.
Yeah.
I've met some really, really good people that were at the kind of forefront of that agile revolution in London, and it's been a lot of like as my mentors, they taught me a lot about agile too. And I've never been a person who is cargo culting in a way. I've never been a Scrum is the way to do things, but the sort of that's what I'm always trying to inject into the teams as well, right? Kind of understand like where did agile come from? What are the sort of base ideas? Kind of almost going back to the manifesto, so teams can find their own ways rather than reading a agile I don't know field guide and following to the letter, right? So the four is sort of again in terms of kind of qualities or maybe competencies is what I focus quite a lot on as
Yeah.
well. Like, if you can put work into making sure that those are on high enough level, then again that enables that autonomy. So you're going back to the previous conversation, right?
Yeah.
Which enables technology choices and teams that run themselves.
I really value, again, from afar, externally, value what you've been able to do at UW, assessing that, with the technology environment that you built and cultivated, and obviously, seemingly, what you're doing at Road, by the way, but obviously, you're a year into your journey. Um, and no doubt the environment that you're looking to build there with some of the team that I can see, on some of the projects that you're working on and what you're building, but also the autonomy that you actually provide your teams, like a learning environment or boundaries to sit within. Because I think, some of the measures that you actually touched on have a number of strong connotations to how businesses gauge productivity at the moment. You're looking at how we can actually measure if the needle of the business or the needle of the product is moving forward. So actually giving the teams the trust, a learning environment, well remunerated, will actually give you so much more in the mid to long term as a business, actually putting that trust in your engineering team. So I think that cultural approach and what you're looking to achieve now at Road seemingly is really working for you. Looks like you've got an awesome team around you.
I believe so. Yeah, and I think the one point I wanted to make, because we go back to UW, I wasn't alone in there. I think we when it comes to UW, it was really good time in my life. We had an amazing team when it comes to the sort of tech management team, right? Whether that's
Yeah.
Martin, chief architect, Damon Michaels, the CTO. I think the unique thing there that it was that we were all very strongly aligned on this sort of thinking. Everybody obviously brought different
Mm,
flavor of that thinking, and we sort of adjusted in there. But I think it rarely happens that you have a group of obviously the leadership team was bigger, but you have a group of almost 10 people that are aligned on those things, right? There is
yeah.
no argument. Nobody has different ways of doing this. So it was a little bit of a sort of magical environment where everybody coming in with those ideas, because we were so aligned. We could really refine this. We could really put this into place with some sort of conviction in a way.
Yeah.
Um, and and you learn like over the years, you learn that not everything is as simple as you sort of make it sound. In a 5 minute or 10 minute podcast that I'm having with you here, and there are challenges, and there are certain things that don't always work and you need to adjust. And you also learn that not everybody is necessarily liking an environment like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is, yeah.
You touch on something previously about breaking problems down, breaking things into microservices, and really understanding problems at a micro scale to then go and solve them, whether that be your way of working, reducing risk. But it would be great to understand how you're assessing your problems and then solving those challenges.
Yeah, a very broad question, I guess. I think it's interesting, like especially because we've mentioned micro again, and the first law of microservices is to not start with microservices, which which is one to live by as well, I believe. But I think every business is different, and there are different classes of problems in a
Yeah.
way, and obviously what we see abroad, especially, which is rather different set of problems than what I've seen at UW, is that we have a platform today that, let's call it, legacy platform, and it's legacy in terms of being 5 years old, right? So it's not 30 of legacy in a way. But it's a platform that is well engineered. It's a kind of classic node stack with Mongo and Mongoose in there, and very kind of REST first design in a way. And it took the business where it is today, a business that is very healthy and is still growing. I think the fundamental problem we have today with that platform is that it's very difficult to apply, say, 50 people or multiple teams into this because of how coupled it is. And this is the sort of main driver for us to be able to move away from this, is to separate it. And I think whether that sort of results in microarchitecture, that slightly different thing in there, but generally um, distribute the different things that this current platform is doing into its own units, is one example of splitting a problem, right? And not only a problem, because this is not a problem. This is more about being able to manage roadmaps or manage the portfolio in separate ways. I think for us, it really starts from understanding what are the business domains in a way. And I think every business has domains, and sometimes they're obvious, sometimes they're less obvious. But like for us, for example, at Road, um, there's a whole family of kind of, let's call them, problems in a way, that are to do with communication with charging stations. There's a whole family of problems with or features and functionalities, to be more positive, when it comes to how charge point owners are operating their charging stations. The charge card is a separate thing. We have obviously the roaming concerns. We have billing and finance, and I think every business is constructed from small units that sort of interact with one another. And I think that should reflect in software as well. And we haven't mentioned this yet, but domain driven design, and the concepts behind domain driven
Yeah.
design really play a large sort of role in how we think and approach what we are building as well. And that sort of, even the word domain comes from there in a way. So
Yeah.
I think being able to really focus groups of people on that area of the business that, as I said, has its own customers and its own sets of features, KPIs. When I was speaking about this kind of 4 different measures you can apply, they're really going there. And then that already makes the problem smaller. And then you kind of continuing sort of looking outside in on these different things. And at some point, if you do have a very monolithic, sort of tightly coupled platform like we do, at some point you want to allow those things to be able to work on their own. You want to sort of scale those systems as well as those things independently. You want them to work independently. You might want to invest more in terms of resource and time to one team over the quarter. So there are different ways that you could start about doing this. Like personally, I think sort of going away for a year as an engineering department, saying, "Hey, we're going to rewrite everything and come back with a new system." You never sort of, yeah, that big bang approach never works in practice. And very often changing the software, like deep in sort of in its heart, is difficult. There's a lot of dependencies. There's a code that is used sort of in production. It sometimes is hard to refactor in a way. And this is where, again, that sort of, for us, the it's not only about event sourcing, but I think the approach generally, the way that I will describe it, is something that Martin Fowler called the strangler fig pattern in a way. You can kind of look it up. He's on his blog, but the idea is that you isolate a piece of the system that you have, and like that strangler fig, you start building around it until you consume it from the inside. And I think technically, on in terms of how do you execute a change like this, thinking about event sourcing is a really good idea. So
Yeah.
To give you some examples,
Please.
so going back to charging stations, right? We work quite a lot with installer companies as well. In fact, it's one of our most sort of important channels in a way. So the way that it works is if you order a charging station from an installation company, that installation company is going to have a preference for the backend, and they will sort of more often than not they will convince the customer to sign up as well because they get tooling from us that allows them to sort of operate better in a way. And we monitor charging stations. So we monitor charging stations in such a way that if we, from the communication of the charging station, or as we analyze data as well, we can recognize there are problems with charging stations. Be it it's misconfigured, maybe the clock is drifting, or there's problems with connectors, or some technical faults, and just you name it, right? It's hardware somewhere in the world we can know about it. So obviously, right now, the way that works, there's a bunch of cron jobs. It also happens, kind of, we can go through Mongo and check what's going on and create
Yeah.
records for those FSS issues, as we call them. So we wanted to kind of replace the system and make it better. Um, Now, our approach in here, kind of, finally entering into the event sourcing in a way, would be to sort of, look at the problem and try to, like, first of all do a lot, like a lot of the work that we do starts with modeling, which is the hardest thing in this entire idea, bringing people together, developers, subject matter experts, business analysts if you have them, to sort of really nail down what happens with that, what is that sort of issue that we're talking about, what is the problem, how you want to call it, what sort of transitions it goes through. We try to describe the life cycle of that thing that is actually significant for the business. It's not only a technical expression of what happens, but actually the business operates on a term that we call an EFSA issue, right? It's a thing that you want to report on that people just generally understand. And again, this is where the domain design is coming in. And that exercise is important. We effectively we end up with a bunch of events that describe the life cycle of it, right? It's raised, it can be acknowledged, it can be closed, very much like an alert in a way. Having this, what do we want to do? We want to start emitting those events. So one approach would be to sort of again go to the legacy application and start emitting those events when those things are happening. The particular problem with that approach is that you sort of get a little bit of maybe a split brain problem in there, where you have to emit an event as well as you need to save that change to the database, because obviously you have an entire legacy platform that is still consuming from that table or
Yeah.
collection. So you can't just not do this. And then, things happen on the network. You might be in a situation where you've saved the data to a database. The event fails to sort of trigger, and there's a problem. There's a data inconsistency. So what we do instead is something that I don't know whether that's a term that is just generally widely recognized, but back from the UW days, we used to call that fabrication of events. And what it really means is that we want to look at the data that is in the legacy sort of data store, recognize the change in state, and fabricate an event, right? Create like a synthetic event to emit this. It didn't really happen because we know it happened in the past, but that's how we will do it. So for this, we've implemented some, bunch of kind of techniques to get data out of Mongo. Mongo is actually, again, back at the UW, the database we were using didn't have any drivers to it, so it was completely different challenge in there. Mongo was great because Mongo offers so-called change streams, so Mongo tells you what's changed.
Yeah.
So we take that, we sort of compare the state. We know a new record has happened, or we know that maybe the installer has closed the alert, so we can emit an event from that. So that's kind of first step to knowing what's going on. But I think what that allows us to do is now, if we need to build a new application or a new feature that is based around the kind of concept of that aggregate root of the FSA issue, we can now do this without touching Mongo. Of course, this is eventually consistent because you don't see the changes right away, but we
Yeah.
can start consuming those messages into new sort of data storage, whatever is now optimized for reading rather than kind of halfway for reading for writing, and we can build new applications that can read that. Um, Outside of Mongo. So let's say if we want to roll a mobile application for the installers that we don't have today, but we might,
Yeah.
we can start building this without touching the legacy platform. So that's step one. Step two for us would be to then start understanding how we change the mutations, how we change the writings. Again, we would go to the legacy application now and see how it sort of accepts maybe queries from the current website, and how something is closed. And instead of writing this to a database, we're now going to emit that event we were previously fabricating, right? So now it becomes a real event, and
Great.
that comes with something that's going to save that to the legacy database, but fundamentally we no longer save to legacy database. So then from there on, the kind of the journey is much simpler. We will identify whatever is still using the legacy data source and kind of start to kill it. So I know it's a lot of detail. Kind of on
No,
the
it's good.
outset. On the outset, the circle basically, we like it doesn't always apply to every single problem, but that's the kind of repetitive stuff that we will be doing all the time. Kind of like build a new data source from the all source of truth, which is in our events, and keep circling like this until we move the source of truth fully to the events.
Do you
So
almost have yeah, I was gonna say, do you almost have like this tick box principle of when to event source, when to not event source? Like, is it that clear in your mind or an engineering team's mind of, yep, that problem, event source, actually, no, it doesn't meet those requirements or principles, don't event source. Is it that clear?
yeah, I think no, it's not that clear. I think
No.
everything we look at is slightly different, and again, and maybe maybe I sort of colored the explanation a little bit, but I think event sourcing isn't even so much about how you execute it. It's a particular way of thinking, it's a particular way of expressing data as well, and because event sourcing is a, let's say, a flavor of event driven system, but there are differences. In event sourcing, we don't have imperative events, right? We don't have commands. You don't say, hey, go and do something. You generally, the way you model your events is you try to model things that happened, facts that happened. They're almost always in, actually they're always in past tense in a way, like things that, again, that happened.
Yep.
And more importantly, I think those, even the names, like, and we use protocol buffers for contracting, for defining this. I think this is about the only technology that is sort of driven very hard, right? This is where you would come together and say we're going to use protocol buffers, and there is no negotiation about that. But even the names of those events should be something that the wider business recognizes. And I think this is really the sort of magic of event sourcing together with domain-driven design. That you want your software to reflect the way that the business works and communicates, not the other way around. And if you do it well, and you can, and your kind of set of events can actually describe all the changes that happen to this traditional database record, that means you verify the model that it works. So not everything is business significant, right? And not everything has to be done this way. In applications that are very much sort of based on maybe data entry, or things that express configuration, or I don't know, things like where you might obtain a database of, I don't know, say, let's say all the countries together with the dining numbers, right? We are unlikely to generally meet this as event, and
Yep.
kind of do a very granular thing. So full kind of pure solution would obviously look like this, but it's not always practical. I think event
Yep.
sourcing brings a lot of challenges to it as well. It's not a golden
Yep.
sort of remedy for everything. I think operationally systems like this are much harder to get around than things that might be a little bit more transactional or a little bit more synchronous in nature or communicating. But it resolves a lot of problems. You're sort of trading one problems for the others, but for scale, I think, and it works. And especially if you're in an environment where you can allow some dose of eventual consistency, right? I think we still have issues with distributed transactions. Not everything can be done this way. Obviously, we handle payments that can't be eventually consistent always. So
Yep.
um, yeah, it's not. But I think if you again, if you sort of looking at I don't know if you're a new joiner on our team, and we will be talking to you about how we go about things. What is our general idea for the future? How we go? Yes, it is that, right? It's a sort of distributed, micro, eventually consistent event source domain driven application. That looks great on job specs, by the way.
It does. I was just about to say, we always, well, we did say, you and I talking about this, because you're humble in your approach. You didn't want to focus on buzzwords. You wanted to focus on the meanings and the reasons behind them and explain your thinking. But that's some buzzword. I love that. But you can, Michael, you can back it up. You can back it up with what you guys are doing. And I did actually want to touch on that point coming to the end of the podcast. I know from speaking to you that you, others in the business, are really passionate about growing the team. There's a need for the team. The Netherlands is such a big following of this platform. So here's a really good example, and London, in fairness. I know you've hired some of the team in London. Now's a really good example to share with the team, or share with the audience, what the team are looking to actually go and build next year, and how they're going to grow next year, and what sort of people you'll be looking for. So people can reach out to you directly, people can reach out to other people in the teams directly. So help us understand what that growth actually looks like.
Yep. Look, I think we always going to be hiring. It's not so much about a target amount of people and bringing them quickly. I think like I'm always hiring. I always want to speak to people that find what I'm talking about interesting. That where this sort of environment and that sort of problems resonates with them. And if they come with ready experience in those areas, then even better, obviously. But we're always going to be hiring. We will be spinning up kind of new teams. I think the team is relatively small today. Surely will double next year. And as we go, we will establish those areas more and more. Again, we talked a little bit about those domains. We have some of them covered by separate teams. Some of them still need to be developed in a way and put together. But I think for anybody um, thinking about it, there's always going to be interesting opportunities. Obviously, as we build the organization, starting from zero, and like, I don't know where there's opportunities for career growth, whatever your interests might be. Whether the technology aspect of that and leadership from sort of technology individual contributor perspective is something that you're
Yeah,
after. There's interesting growth in there. As the teams are growing, leadership aspect of the department is also can be more and more interesting. So I think there's a little bit of everything for everybody, especially if you kind of like the sort of idea if you want to own something, if you want to do something on your own. I think I'm always happy to hear that rather than the sort of I'm not the person to be strongly telling you what to do, though there's still always an element of that. But yeah, that's what we're going to do. That's how we're going to grow. I think we want to bring like-minded people, people that understand that, and like doing software. I think we all
yeah,
that's true. I still code as well, less now, and maybe the team isn't as happy when I'm doing this anymore. But it's always been a very important thing. Kind of, we don't like pass through management or corner office management in a way. So everybody's very much always knowing what they're talking about. We want smart people around us so we can learn from each other.
yeah. And referring back to some of those buzzwords on the spec, I can honestly vouch for the technology environments that you build. You look for pure technologists. I think, like you mentioned, some of the stack that you wrote some of your services in, Node.js, everything runs on AWS. But I think as a mindset, you're generally quite agnostic.
Yeah.
So I'd implore people listening from all backgrounds to reach out to Michael, reach out to the talent team, follow Road, see what they're building. They're providing real life value that's going to impact a lot of people in years to come with government pledges that we see to EV on a year by year basis. So take a look at Road and see what they're building. I just want to say a big thanks, Michael. Obviously, this has been in the wings for a few months. I'm really pleased that we're here. You've smashed it. So a big thank you.
Take care, Elliot.
Hey guys, thanks for watching this episode. Massively appreciate you listening and checking in with us. If you want to find out more about us and what we're doing, please check us out on social media. What we're trying to do at Engineers is build a community to drive knowledge sharing and experiences. On Twitter, we can be found Engineers.io. It's no underscore. We've also got a website which is engineers.io. These links will all be posted in the description. Any feedback and comments are massively appreciated. We're always looking to improve on where we can. Thanks, guys.